Welcome to the Spawn Chunks, episode number 298 for Monday, May 20th, 2024. This is a podcast all about Minecraft, and it is available across all major podcasting platforms. That includes YouTube. If you're enjoying the show, consider tapping that follow button or that subscribe button on YouTube wherever you're listening to this. It's free, and it does a lot to help us out. My name is Joel Duggan, and joining me, as always, is the belated birthday boy himself, Johnny, or Pixel Riffs for you people on the internet.
I think at this age I'm birthday man. I don't know if I qualify as birthday boy these days. The young master has another birthday. But we've been talking about the stuff I was doing on my birthday, namely planting stuff in the garden and watching Dune Part 1, along with a little bit of a tangent into other sci-fi properties, as Joel and I are wont to do. We've been talking about that all on the Render Distance. That's the extended version of the podcast for our patrons, which you can get hold of from patreon.com/thespawnchunks. Our patrons also have access to the full calendar of patron events, which includes our monthly Minecraft Hangout, which this time around is going to be on Saturday, June 1st. It's just missing the end of May, but I have stuff going on next weekend, so we're going to be pushing it to the weekend right after May, so everyone has the full month to let us know what they've been up to in Minecraft that month. That's going to be at 10 a.m. Atlantic, 2 p.m. UK, the usual sort of time. Same time we record the show in Discord, which is another thing our patrons get to listen in on live when we do our show recording every week. This is a Chunk Mail Dispenser episode, which means we're taking a focus on the community and community emails. That was a perk that was unlocked by our patrons a long time ago, and we are happy to keep it going. We also have a quarterly hangout coming up in the not-too-distant future, but that's probably not going to turn up until July. So, once again, plenty of time to listen into the facts and figures behind the podcast over the last little while.
So what have you been up to in Minecraft this week, my friend?
Well, this week, a milestone for the Minecraft SOS project. The dig is now complete, and now I'm working on rebuilding it all. So we had a send-off for the last 3 chunks, which I can drop some screenshots of into our Discord for people. It was a great event, and nobody died whatsoever. That's a blatant lie. 3 people died during the course of the whole thing, which got a little chaotic, we should say, because it began with everybody carving out individual chunks in teams of 3. It was going to be a 2v2 contest, but then 11 people showed up, myself included. So we ended up with teams of 3, and then Owen was helping me dig out the ancient city part of things. And during that, because the other teams were getting a bit competitive, one of them started pouring lava and water above the other one's chunks so that more blocks would generate that they had to break. And that wasn't technically speaking against the rules, so they were lava casting areas above the chunk. And there was some debate about whether or not that was part of what they had to do or not. But then in retaliation, one of that team spawned a wither in the other team's chunk. And the wither got out and killed 3 people. So, yeah, you can imagine, right? But it was a blast. It was so funny. The entire thing was streamed by various people, including me. So the VOD of that is still up on Twitch. It'll probably be on my YouTube channel at some stage as well. And a summary of all of that, including replay mod, time-lapse footage, and everything, is now up on my main channel as part of the latest episode. I was revived. Everyone else was revived, actually. We just managed to scrape together enough of the fate coins that we're using to revive each other to get that done. But it now costs 10 coins to revive a person, so that was 30 coins gone in a single day. And fortunately, I'd just been working on the way of getting everybody another fate coin by splashing them with all of the splash potions in the game. So there were still like a couple of coins in circulation. But that means I was able to get on and start rebuilding. So I now have a schematic of the hole as it was loaded into the air above it, starting at Y128, and I think it tops out at about Y300. And so that is now hovering in the sky, waiting to be rebuilt. I've gone up to the ancient city, and the cave above the ancient city, the ceiling of that is now in. So from there, I'm just building up the outer walls. There's like geodes and stuff to build into the outside of it. And there are a few kind of generated caves that I've decided to sketch out so that it's possible to see it from the outside and it doesn't just look like a big hollow rock. It looks like it's actually got some bulk to it. Light Matica has been invaluable for this, not only because I have to make sure I place a lot of the blocks in the right spaces, but it has the easy place mode, which I've been avoiding using for the longest time because it feels very cheaty. It actually allows you to place blocks in the air unsupported. You can just kind of paint over the blueprint just by holding down right click, and in survival it automatically pick blocks for you. It places stuff as fast as you possibly can, and anything that is in your inventory that's in the blueprint in front of you can be placed in, and you just have to like run around holding down right click. The only reason I'm using it is because Deep Slate is a directional block. And so if I ended up with a ton of Deep Slate like that and I couldn't place it against any supporting blocks, it would probably take me months just to do the Deep Slate layers. And I need to get this done within the next 2 weeks because this is the last stretch of Minecraft SOS before the server ends and we all go back to whatever we were doing before. So I'm basically racing against time to get this done. I need to place an awful lot of resources, and dripstone, pointed dripstone, skulk vein, and glow lichen are now the bane of my existence, because so often they cover the edges of blocks and have to be placed in specific orientations in the case of the pointed dripstone, and it's so difficult to get that right on the fly when you are running around frantically spamming blocks and reloading your inventory from shulker boxes. So it's an ordeal at the moment, but the results are going to be worth it, and I'm really happy with the progress that's been made so far.
The image that you shared in our live chat with the projection from Lightmatica above the great big dig hole, I was thinking in my head more like a floating island, like where it tapers at the bottom and has more, we'll say, artistic license taken. But this really is like a cookie cutter. Like you took a biscuit cutter into your dough and just like plunged it into the Minecraft terrain and then pulled up a cylinder of cross section, in the same way that we were talking about seeing a geode cut in half on the walls of your great big dig. Now we see a geode cut in half, like the other part of it, on this floating Lightmatica blueprint. That's wild. And refresh my memory, this was from like a sci-fi image or a book or something that inspired you?
It's a short film called Solstice 5. You can find it on YouTube.
That's what it was.
By an effects artist called Paul Chadayason. And it's a giant mining rig that can basically pull out like an apple core of terrain out of a planet, and then they process it for all of the minerals because it's super high in rich minerals that they were using to build these starships. And that was the initial inspiration behind it. So far, I have only planned the schematic for building the terrain portion of this, and if I can get to the machinery portion of this, then great. If not, then I've just done a big artistic Minecraft piece. But part of this is obviously about the journey, and it's about doing it on this hardcore server, where I've died 3 times, so if this was a legit hardcore project, I'd be starting from scratch several times over by now. I think it's such a fun thing to do as somebody who is a big fan of the way Minecraft generation happens, and I've studied this stuff and put it into survival guide videos and bits and pieces. It's always fascinating for me to see a cross-section of terrain and see what's in there, and like the geode stuff looks very beautiful, but then all of the ore distribution and stuff is in there, and it's a great refresher on like, oh yeah, no, you can really clearly see where iron takes over from copper as you go down through the stone layers and that kind of thing. So I really enjoy doing projects like this, and as a giant cylinder like that, it really gives the impact that I wanted it to. Plus, if I was tapering it down into a floating island, I feel like that would have almost been more work than setting up this cylinder sort of schematic was in the first place, because I'd have had to do a lot more creative, take more creative liberties with it, whereas this feels very like geometric, and as long as I can just run a couple of commands to fill areas in with air and make sure that there's some hollow stuff in there so I don't have to put all of the material that I mined back into it, it's going to come together pretty well, I think.
So my first guess is that, well, this won't be happening again anytime soon. What have you learned from doing this? And would you consider doing it again, perhaps at a smaller scale, on like the survival guide, or a world that didn't involve like the risk of having to start over with hardcore? Like if it was just something like a smaller project where you did something like a quarter of the scale, but with the same effect of like pulling cylinders out of the ground, or shapes, doesn't necessarily have to be a cylinder. I
mean, I'd love to do it again. I need to be able to dedicate the time to it. I mean, this has been 4 months worth of Minecraft SOS, more or less.
Wow.
Like 3 or 4 has been just digging out that area and making sure there are no blocks left. And I think the setup I had a beacon, haste, moss mining through the deep slate layers, all of that stuff. I think get that set up beforehand was kind of my goal in this case, and I managed to tear down a lot of layers on the surface simply because you didn't need haste to insta-mine dirt and grass, so I was able to get a lot of that done before it became laborious to dig out all of the stone by hand, and we didn't have access to the nether or the end, so I had no shulker boxes, I had no access to beacons, so on and so forth. I think if I were to do this in Survival Guide, I would be a lot better prepared already, and I think the chunk-by-chunk approach that I took when digging out an area of this size was probably the best thing I could have done, because you avoid slimes spawning, you're not taking it down layer by layer in these broad sweeps, you're doing it 16 by 16 chunks at a time, and that makes sure that any slimes that are going to spawn in that region are already taken care of because you've spawn-proofed it, water at the bottom of the chunk, and you don't have to worry about stuff constantly nagging at you and looking over your shoulder every 5 minutes. So that was kind of the takeaways from it, was that I definitely predicted that was going to be a concern. The other thing I might do is scout the location better, because this was a very tall chunk, which I knew to begin with because I wanted it to be near spawn, and all of the terrain near spawn was quite tall. But also it had an ancient city underneath, which led to all of the problems with, like, it's going to look really cool once I dig it out of the ground, but I'm going to run into the warden a couple of times while I do this. And I think if I'd picked a different location to do that, maybe like a Badlands biome so you can see all of the strata of the terracotta in the terrain, maybe just something that looks a little different to the standard Minecraft layout, or something that has a couple of interesting cave biomes underneath. Would love to do this with a lush cave involved at some stage, although I imagine managing water at that stage might become a problem as well, because there's so many little pockets of it in a lush cave that could be kind of difficult to reproduce. Either way, absolute blast doing this project. Highly recommend it to anybody who's got the time. It will take you the rest of the year, probably, so best of luck.
It would be really cool to do it with a section of ocean if you could figure out a way to contain the water when you move the chunks up into the air, because then you'd have fish, maybe guardians, like you could have stuff moving around in there that would add some real life to it. But of course you'd have to have, I'm assuming, glass, or I guess if you're doing it as just an art piece, then you could use like barrier blocks or something to hold the water in place.
Yeah.
But that would be really cool looking to have, like those, like the different kinds of chunks, almost like, because you're talking about an alien or a technology that cores planets to get minerals for starships. I think even if it was more like research based, like what's this made of? Let's pull up a bunch of different core samples, and see what's what. And like you'd have the Badlands, and you'd have the lush cave, and then you'd have the ocean section. Like coral reef would look really cool. Like all that kind of stuff could be really interesting as like a cross section, almost like a testing sample of a Minecraft planet. I don't know. It's a really cool idea. I admire the scale, man. Like that's a lot.
Yeah, it's pretty big. That's the thing. I designed the scale to be something that was going to look impressive from the outside, and I think I've achieved that as long as I can continue building it. So probably have an update for the next couple of weeks, but then after that, that'll be all the time I have. So cross your fingers for me, folks. While I've been finishing this, you've been finishing stuff on West Hill as well. What's new from the Citadel?
It is indeed nice to check things off, and I have finished the Lilac Farmstead this week. It has been a lot longer on the calendar than I ever anticipated. It was a good 15 streams, which I guess is normal for that size of an area, but my streams this year, like the calendar year of 2024, have been shorter. I've been averaging more 2 hours a stream as opposed to 3. So they do the number of parts involved in a build goes from 10 to 12 up to like 15 sometimes. But also because of being ill one week and having a sore back with a issue before, like I did not get my full like 4 streams a week in. And so it took a little bit longer on the calendar. So I'm very happy to have this done. I'm also happy with it. It just took a lot longer than I anticipated. And this week I put the finishing touches on the outside. So those last little bits of adding overgrowth of like bushes and grass and moss carpet and things along the outside of the deep slate wall that borders the entire farm. And it's just so fulfilling, the amount of, I guess, belief or substantial time in the world that adds to a build when you're
Mm-hmm.
just, and you're not, it's not that hard. I'm not even thinking that much about it. It's like, does grass look good there? Yeah, it looks good there. Okay, this is a lot of space. What about a bush? How about a bush that trickles down over the hill? And this is a lot of space here. I know, I'll add a tree stump. I didn't even think about that tree stump until I was just looking at that space going like, it needs something, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to block the view. And I thought, well, there's a farm wall here and a road here. If there was a tree here before, people probably would have moved it because it might have been in the way, you know?
Yeah.
And so, or maybe it fell across the road and people had to remove it in a storm from a storm, like just little things like that, that I think add a lot of interest to the world. And also when you're doing this kind of landscaping in this area, for me, it's just a lot of green. There's a
Yeah.
lot of green blocks. And so by adding in like a little bit of mud and muddy mangrove roots and soul sand and the tree stump, like it adds this little checker pattern of brown that breaks up the monotony of the green, which is, you know, something that you take for granted. Like if you go for a hike, you look about how much grass there is versus how much dirt. There's a lot of dirt. It's a lot of
Yeah.
brown, you know, and but your brain goes, yeah, it was a nice green day. Like I just remember seeing grass and trees and leaves and green and happy. You don't think about like all the brown that's around. And
Yeah.
so just trying to remember that and trying to bring that back into the build was important. So that was like the first, I guess, half of the week was spent on that. It again, not a terribly hard thing to do, but it takes a while when you've got a large perimeter going around the entire thing. I also did a little bit of work on like the top tier of the farm, and I couldn't decide what I wanted to put up there. A well didn't really make a lot of sense because we're so close to rivers and ponds in this area. And so what I did was more of that like buried bush blocks or leaf blocks and mossy cobble to kind of make it look like thistles or just like rough patches of grass that wouldn't be good for farming, that don't look like you want to walk over it. So it kind of like pushes the player to use the path as opposed to just walk across the grass because it looks kind of like uncomfortable
Mm-hmm.
or just full of stuff that in Minecraft is currently all flat, but in real life it would be like rocks and things that you'd stub your toe on and yet you wouldn't necessarily want to walk across. So that worked out really, really well. And then I moved inside. So the last thing was this weekend, mostly on Sunday, and that was going inside with the armor statue data pack and the mini blocks that we have on the server from the Wandering Trades data pack. And that just gives us access to little things that you can place in the world, specifically anything on an angle, anything that's leaning tends to really add a lot of life. So I made
Mm-hmm.
a stone hoe and put that upside down next to the fireplace. Looks like a fireplace poker. I put beehives as mini blocks. Look great because they look like bread boxes or spice containers. That's in the kitchen. I put a loaf of bread on an armor stand and had that kind of like sit on the kitchen counter because it looks like fresh baked bread, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
What else did I do? Another beehive up in the loft above the bedroom is like a storage thing. And then we also had more traditional things like putting some allium in flower pots in the windows. We do have a data pack on the server that gives you a random chance to have like a bundle of flowers as opposed to just a single. And I lucked out and the flower pot in the window has like a bundle. So it looks like a really full bouquet of alliums, which are everywhere out front. So the front walk has got like pink petals and allium. And man, if they ever add more foliage blocks, we'll say blocks with air quotes in Minecraft that work like the pink petals, I am down.
Yeah.
I don't even care what color they are. They give you so many options and they break the Minecraft grid so easily
Yeah.
with so much player control. It's amazing. It's a wonderful block to play with. And making the front walk and the front gardens, adding things like flowering azalea saplings in a flower pot, also a great little thing for like a flower farm. Looks like a little flower sapling or a bush they're trying to cultivate, that kind of thing. And then the last thing I did was put like a pair of boots and a pair of shears hanging at the front. I think it was Cosmic that suggested it in my chat. And it's a great idea, but unfortunately in Minecraft, it just doesn't look the greatest. The boots overlap one another and they're flat, like pixel planes,
Yeah.
so they don't really have any depth to them. So I might look at maybe trying to add a custom resource pack model for boots. So like if you want to place them in the world on an armor stand, they actually look like they have some meat to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then the shears, they look fine. They look like a pair of shears hanging on the wall, but they look really tiny. If you take a pickaxe from your hand and you use the armor stand data pack to hang it from like a tripwire hook on the wall, it looks like a pickaxe. It looks like something you can grab. it looks a bit bigger in your hand, but like the shears look way larger in your hand as a player than they do when you put them down in the world.
Oh,
Just because of the size of their I think it's because they're on an angle, but they're not like long and skinny, and they just don't have that same sort of vibe. And and I think that also the weapons, like a sword and a pickaxe, you're meant to see them like on other players, and they're meant to look to scale. And I don't necessarily think that the shears, because they work in a square box as sprite art, they don't look like shears in the world. They really look like a giant pair of toenail clippers. Like it's a weird vibe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so I might revisit that and change that out for like a shovel or something else that might be just a little bit nicer looking. And then I put in an axe in the wood pile in the back, but I've done that before. So all that stuff is just these little details that set these items at angles or give a little bit of life. And I just wanted to make sure that when you walk in the front door, back door, or when you look in the kitchen, it just feels like someone lives there. And it just goes a long way, I think, to accomplish that. And I wish there was more options like that in vanilla Minecraft. Like I feel like having things like plates or place settings or cups, and like, I mean, I know we've got a flower pot and that's what people use as a cup, but it'd be really cool if we actually had cups. And they could be nondescript, like you could make them out of terracotta. They don't have to be fancy, but because a cup, like a brown cup, could be very easily something that could be used in a medieval setting, and then a white cup could be used in a modern city, right? So like it wouldn't be too hard, I think, to get multiple uses out of things. And then who knows what players could come up with if the blocks placed in a certain way, then using them in other builds, like what happens when you sandwich a cup between, a cactus and something else like that. You could come up with all kinds of really neat things. I could see people coming up with some inventive ways, but whenever I get into the details and the weeds on these things, I always feel like there's a few things that are missing from Minecraft. And I'm curious, actually, looking forward with the news recently about the component data and the new paintings that we got last week, 2 weeks ago. I'm wondering if data pack authors are going to have more access to be able to either with resource packs add painting textures that look like things that would hang on walls in farms or modern cities, that kind of thing, or have the ability to then add paintings. So you don't lose the existing Minecraft paintings, but then add additional paintings via data pack that would be like, tools hanging on the side of a work shed, or other things that would be nice to have for those final touches that you just can't get at with like the big blocky Minecraft models that we currently have.
Yeah, like anything that I think the phrase you had, breaks the grid, I think that's such an important concept in interiors looking detailed and lived in, that's like kind of missing from what Minecraft gives you for obvious reasons. Like if it's breaking the grid, then why is the grid such an integral part of Minecraft? But I think, like you said, giving the people tools like pink petals, being able to shape those in really interesting ways. Like I've seen people do some fantastic like winding paths with those, just because you can place them and they look like they're angled and circular, and you can kind of do all kinds of stuff with those. But then obviously so many of the objects that you're using to furnish a home with are going to be snapped to the grid in very obvious ways. So you've got to pull a lot of different tricks to make a space look lived in that way. The other thing I absolutely love about this, that I'm sure you've shared in previous screenshots, since it wasn't mentioned in the stuff that you've done recently, is the raised beds in the farmland area that you've got. I'm not sure if those are those beets or like potatoes. I know you have like a slightly different resource pack.
It's there. Beetroot. Yeah, it's a beetroot, but the resource pack for me, I made it look more like real beets in real life. So it's less of that red Minecraft beet and more of like a purple. Honestly, you could mistake them for rhubarb if you didn't know that Minecraft had beets roots, but that's essentially what they look like. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think those look great. They're a great like color, harmony with the flowers that you're growing around it. And as somebody who's been doing a lot of gardening recently, I'm finding the concept of raised beds more and more attractive. And I usually end up like planting my crops just like in the ground. Like I hoe whatever grass is already there, or like I put it at like foot level for the player, whereas I think raising it up to waist height and having that kind of like easily accessed crop farm for like a homestead like this, it makes a lot of sense. And I think it suits the surroundings really well. So that's a really nice set of detailed raised beds. And hopefully the screenshots of this are going to be in our show notes. People can check those out and get some inspiration from those if they weren't able to catch it on stream.
Well, thanks, man. I really appreciate that. And I'll give you a little tip as to why they're raised, and that's so you can see them from the road.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
Because
yeah,
the
yeah. It's
road is
sightlines.
2 blocks, I think, lower than the actual top of the farm. You have to go up like a small path. And if they were just in the ground, then all you saw was like the top part of the green of the
Yeah.
beetroot texture. And this way you get to see the lilac color, the magentas and the purples and stuff that are in there that match everything else. But yeah, it also felt good as like a farmstead that would have like the idea was like that the big farm with the lilacs and the pitcher plants is kind of like what they would be farming to then sell and trade with. But then the other things like the carrot patches and the berry patches and the little flower gardens would be more of just for them, like just, consumption on the farm to feed themselves, but also just like nice things to have. Like you just want your garden to look good. And
Yeah.
you've already got a green thumb for flowers because you're doing it like at a large scale. So you'd imagine that the person that would have this kind of farm would also have a lot of really nice flower beds and things
Yeah.
like that near the house. But no, I appreciate that. It was a fun project to work on. It was definitely outside of my comfort zone. A lot of pink and a lot of textures I don't normally work with. So it was a good exercise, and I think I learned a lot doing it.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing is that you come away with this with new skills and stuff that you can apply to future projects, for sure.
Well, speaking of future projects, Minecraft Java Edition Snapshot 24W20A dropped last week. Among other things, 24W20A includes a buff to the amount of redstone dust dropped by witches, as well as a long requested change to make piston sounds a tad more pleasing to the ear. We're also throwing 41 new bug fixes in the mix because we like squashing bugs. That's a quote from the release article. Changes in 24W20A, which is now always drop 4 to 8 redstone dust on death. This is to improve the viability of farms that utilize witch huts to obtain redstone dust. Improved player attribute and effect handling. Custom set base attributes are now kept when respawning. Active effects and modifiers are kept when changing dimensions or winning the game. And the game credits have also been updated. Under sounds, piston sounds have been updated with a lower volume and lower attenuation. This is a word that means reduction in force, effect, or value. This was done to address the long received feedback on the sound of being too harsh and loud, creating very noisy redstone builds. Technical changes in 24W20A, the data pack version is now 44. The dimension padding jigsaw structure NBT tag was changed. Now it is an object with fields bottom, which is vertical padding at the bottom of the dimension, a non-negative integer, and top is the vertical padding at the top of the dimension, non-negative integer. This is to prevent structures from exceeding the vertical boundaries of the world and generating below bedrock or above world height. The data-driven enchantments field's weight now has an upper bound of 1024, and a max level now has an upper bound of 255. Under entity predicates, there's a new option, movement affected by, which is an optional location predicate. When present, this adds requirements on a block at most 0.5 blocks below the entity, which can affect its movement, similar to how honey or soul sand can still affect player movements through slabs. Bug fixes of note in 24W20A. Status effects are lost when returning to the overworld from the exit end portal. Armor attributes list can be too long. The player's horizontal motion does not affect fired projectiles in certain situations. Player's attributes reset back to default values upon respawning. Exiting the end portal resets player attributes to their default values. Shearing a bogged spawns mushrooms at the bogged's feet. Horse armor and wolf armor are deleted when used on an armor stand. For the full list of bugs addressed in this snapshot, visit the Minecraft.net changelog article linked in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com.
The other big news, of course, is that Minecraft is turning 15. Minecraft celebrated its 15th birthday the same day I celebrated my 37th birthday, actually, on May 17th of this year. And for 15 days, running from May 15th to the 29th, the Minecraft team are celebrating this milestone with discounts on Minecraft games, which includes vanilla Minecraft, but also includes Minecraft Dungeons and Minecraft Legends. There are exclusive items for the Bedrock Edition character creator celebrating the 15th birthday of the game. There are also capes, which can be claimed for watching Twitch or TikTok content, and one which you can simply log in and claim from Minecraft.net. We'll have a link to that in our show notes as well. And note that if you're a Java player, capes will be added to the game by July 8th, but Bedrock players can, of course, receive them now. Codes earned through TikTok and Twitch have to be redeemed by June 30th for them to successfully receive the cape. So bear that in mind if you're trying to get hold of these.
Have you tried to get any of the 15th anniversary bonus stuff?
I have not. I'm not a Bedrock player by trade, so I don't worry too much about the character creator stuff, and I haven't bothered with the capes simply because I'm feeling stubborn at this point, because my Twitch chat was a zoo this week. There was so many people popping into the streams going, how do I get the cape? How do I get the cape? And it seems to have driven a lot of people to the content who are just there to, like, grab the freebie and then leave, which is fine, but is not necessarily the environment we want to foster as Twitch streamers. It might be slightly better on TikTok, where the content is kind of like a revolving train of things that you just kind of keep watching and watching, but on Twitch the experience is like the mods went into panic mode, or like at least got very organized very quickly. So full credit to everybody who's been fielding questions about the capes and why isn't my code here. A lot of that stuff seems to have been subject to delays, probably because of the sheer demand for it. So I was not like holding out for grabbing this first thing, and I'm honestly a little bit not disillusioned, but I'm not entirely convinced by the whole cape thing as a status symbol in Minecraft anyway. So I'm perhaps less passionate about these than the average Minecraft player is.
I'm with you. I've got I think a custom texture on my Elytra that make them look like sci-fi wings just for fun. So like even if I have a cape, it never shows up because of the texture override. I went through the process of getting the 15th anniversary creeper cape on the Minecraft.net website just to kind of go through that experience. I had several people in my Discord chat posting links directly to the section of the website, because you're going to go there and then you have to scroll through, excuse me, a lot of different things on the website before you find the thing. It then said log in to claim the cape. So I logged in, and after login, it spat me out somewhere else on the website. And I had to go find the link again to claim the cape. And then once I claimed the cape, I clicked the button, and then it changed to like, well, now try it on. It's like, well, did I claim it? Like there was very little graphic design and user feedback that you were doing it right. And while there is an article on Minecraft.net, good luck finding that unless you've got a direct link to it from social media somewhere, that explains how to do this. I think that the vast majority of Minecraft players, specifically with so many of these 15th anniversary rewards being Bedrock based, are not getting the information because it's not on YouTube. The Minecraft YouTube channel has an ad for 50% off the games right now, and a cool like animated montage with some fun music and dancing and great animation. But there's nothing to say, hey, if you're playing and you want the Twitch cape, here's how to do it. There is a post on Instagram from Minecraft, but it's not a video. It's a single image, and you have to read a bit underneath it. And even then, it's not super clear on how to do it. TikTok works differently than Twitch. Twitch, you have to have drops enabled as a creator. So if you don't have them enabled, then that's one problem. And then two, as a user, you have to link your game to Twitch in order to collect the drops. Because I did this with No Man's Sky. Now, to your point earlier, I feel like drops do bring in either returning eyes or new eyes to the game, because I actually ended up playing and enjoying No Man's Sky better because I spent some time watching some No Man's Skies playing on Twitch, and it gave me things like ships and cool, like changing the color of my jetpack and like other things that I would have normally not got in the game without putting in considerable amount of time. And I mean, like Twitch drops, like, yes, you have to have the window open, but you don't have to be there watching. Like you can leave it running and go make dinner and still get your drops.
Lurk. Yeah.
You just have to go back and click claim on the calendar day before that drop is done, because after they move on and there's a new drop, then you can't claim the other ones, even if you did put in the watch time. So I thought, well, that's interesting. But if you're going to do it knowing the young-ish nature of the Minecraft audience at large, when you took a look at the averages, like you really kind of have to telegraph this to them in the media that they consume. The fact that there's not a step-by-step how to do this on YouTube is bewildering to me. Like trying to find a Minecraft.net article, which I'm not sure how many times lately you've been trying to navigate Minecraft.net, but it is really clunky right now. They've made a lot of changes. The 15th anniversary page is a lot to look at. Like, I wasn't sure what's clickable and scrollable, what's important information and what's just fluff. Like it really is a lot. And I'm on a desktop. I'm not sure what it looks like on a phone, which is how a lot of people are probably going to go there, right? Or at the very least mobile, like on a tablet, because of all the different versions of Minecraft that are out there. But anyway, I'm with you. I think that it was thankfully I don't have the same size audience you do, so I didn't have quite the number of people coming in and asking about drops and things like that. But like you said, there's a mod overlap, so my mods were prepared because of what happened to you, and so there was a command ready for people, and it was like, yes, drops are enabled. No, this is not how you get the cape. This is the code that you need. I even had people in my chat giving us feedback that you couldn't copy and paste the code; you had to actually type it in by hand. I'm just like, oh my gosh, like there's just so many obvious things that I feel like were missed. That said, I think it's cool that Minecraft is celebrating a 15th anniversary. It's cool that the games are on sale. Putting games like this on sale, which I don't remember the last time I saw Minecraft on sale. Like, it
was like 10th anniversary. They've only done it for like really specific milestones in the game's history, and I think the 10th anniversary, which we would have covered on the show, I think at this point, or at least near enough, like it was the last time that they did a proper sale for it.
Yeah. And I mean, talk about, it's a high value game at regular price, but then there is that, like, well, when you're trying to convince a friend or a family member that it isn't really sure about it to get into it, now you can say it's like half price. Like, it costs less than 2 pints. Like, just go for it, you know? And I think that's great. Like, I think that there's a lot of good happening, but there's just a lot being lost in the messaging, especially with like Java capes not being added until July 8th, which is odd to me. Like, just, I want to, what if I really was excited about capes and I wanted to celebrate now? I
wonder
it now, get it later.
I wonder if it's, I don't know how capes work on the back end. I'm wondering if it's something to do with like them not being able to add them until the next update, like until the next like major vanilla.
That's
and they don't want to put out like a hotfix 1.20.7 and throw everybody's like current worlds out the window again, just so that people can get some cosmetic rewards. I don't know if that's the case, but Bedrock, obviously, like, you have to be updated to the latest version, so there's less of this kind of version discrepancy problem. But yeah, honestly, I'm not entirely confident in how that works. So take my words here with a grain of salt. I'm really not sure.
I wonder if that's a bit of a, I don't want to say reveal, but like a hint or an area on the calendar to watch as potentially the release date for 1.21.
I mean, it would line up because it's when I'm going to be in the United States helping my helping my brother-in-law get married. So it follows on with our current trend of like picks is away when all of the big Minecraft stuff happens. But you know, it'll give me something to look forward to when I get home, I guess.
I hope there's a slider on a calendar at Mojang that's just like, you know, picks is in US.
Like,
move it along.
I need to make sure they have my calendar just in case they need to plan some more major updates.
That's great.
Let's talk about the snapshot at least, because obviously we've said our piece about the 15th anniversary stuff. I think the Piston sound change has been a point of controversy in the community from what I have heard. And my unpopular opinion about this is that it's fine. Like, I logged in, I think I listened to it in an Azuma video first, and he said, I don't know if I like this so much. And I logged in and I was like, you know what, this is not nearly as bad as what I have seen people make it out to be. Like, people in my Twitch chat have been coming in expecting me to like roast Mojang for changing the sound of Pistons. I think some YouTube meme lord who I would like to drop kick into the sun has said it sounds like a fish slapping, and people get that cannot unsee mentality where they're like, oh, okay, like it's got catchy branding now to say that it sounds like a fish, and I'm like, I don't need this. It's the audio equivalent of saying that like the copper blocks look like beans, right? At this point, we're okay. We can get over this collectively as a community. I think they still need to do some tweaking on it if there's this amount of negative feedback, obviously, because they're like the negative feedback is justified. People are just expressing it in a way that feels very trolly. I think the changes themselves are pretty well justified. The sound is much less harsh on the ears. It has less of that grating high frequency that the kind of rubbing of two materials together is supposed to be part of that piston mechanism. They also seem to have reduced the range at which pistons can be heard. Whether that's a feature of the sound effect or whether that's just something they've done with the range in the same way that you can adjust the range that a note block is audible or a jukebox is audible. It seems like you get 4 or 5 blocks away and you don't hear things anymore. And I think that's potentially a good thing for pistons. It's definitely a good thing for like dispensers and noises like that where it's kind of constant ticking in the background. And I think the main problem is that pistons have been in the game since 2011, so they have been in the game for almost the full lifespan of Minecraft. It's been 13 years, and people are used to the noise. So this is obviously a huge change, kind of comes out of left field because nobody expected them to change piston noises, and they pitched it as like, this is a huge quality of life improvement because people have been wanting this for a while because we always get the feedback that piston noises are too noisy. And I think the problem is that pistons are used so heavily in some contraptions that there are very few sound effects that sound good when you hear them repetitively and still sound like they are part of a mechanism in this way. Like, I can listen to the whoosh of sand or the kind of pop of items being collected and be perfectly fine with those noises, but even this piston noise with a slightly kind of softer tone to it is still going to grate if you're hearing it constantly from like a... You know, they don't have zero ticking farms anymore, but anything that shuttles stuff back and forth with a piston, like the shifting floor flower farms, for example, something like that is always going to contribute to a lot of the noise pollution that happens around redstone contraptions. And so while I think they are a step in the right direction, I think dialing it in so the community is at least happy with it is going to be what they should pursue, rather than making sure that the piston sound is going to be perfectly fine at any volume and at any number of pistons, because I think at this point it's something that is going to be controversial regardless of how you do it, and people are just going to have to get used to it.
I had a really interesting chat with my community on one of the streams this weekend, and I think the general consensus from most people not jumping on the bandwagon of just completely slamming it, but saying like, that's just something that's just not sitting right with me about it. And the discussion went the way of, we're glad they changed it because it was too loud before.
Yeah.
But it's not that the volume is now soft and that's the problem. It's the subjective feeling and the juxtaposition of a very soft, not volume wise, but just like in terms of its impact is very soft.
Yeah.
And when you compare that to what a piston looks like, it's cobblestone and wood, right? And it moves very abruptly. And the fact that something moves that quickly at that size and makes so little noise feels very modern. And it doesn't look very modern. If you were to tell me that this is the sound from a piston on a Minecraft motorbike, I'd be just like, yeah, that tracks. I don't know how we're going to ride a motorbike with square wheels, but like at least we know that we're not going to feel the bumps as we go.
Yeah.
But the piston, if it went more steampunky, like had a little bit more clicks or kind of like that, if you ever see like a winch, like the noise that they added in movies when you're hoisting up something on a winch and it has like tick 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 tick, that kind of like that repetitive noise, a retraction or an extension, a different noise for the retraction and extension, like that kind of stuff I could see being a little bit better received than what they've done. I don't dislike it. It's just it's odd to me, and I think that's something that stands out. I like the reduction in range too. Like I think that's smart. I like that idea because I remember building a flower farm for Cosmic on the Citadel, and I remember constantly telling myself I don't need to shout while on stream because the stream audio for Minecraft is ducked. But in my headphones, when I turned on both the Nether and the Overworld flower farms at the same time, like you felt like you were in a mechanics factory, and then you just feel like you're shouting to people, right? When you don't have to.
It's when you open the music and sounds menu and start dialing those block sounds back a little bit, because in that case, it's also the grass breaking constantly and the flowers breaking. It all has that like dirt breaking sound effect, but even that accompanied by the pistons is just cacophony. And I think my gauge for new sound effects like this is always, if I came into the game as a new player, or if this was the sound effect that Pistons had from the start, would it stand out to me as annoying? And the answer in this case is absolutely not. Like, I wouldn't be making the comparison, oh, this sounds like a fish slapping, if they had never given me another sound effect. And I think that's the mentality that I think I encourage a lot of other people to go into this with, is like, if you were a new player, would you get annoyed by this Piston sound the way you're annoyed with the current Piston sound?
Right.
And I think that's going to... I mean, it's not going to change anybody's minds if they've already made their minds up, but I think that's a valuable perspective to have on any stuff like this, in the same way that back in 1.14, when we were looking at texture changes, if we came into the game and that was the only grass block we had ever seen, would we find it like weird and jarring the way we find it as somebody who was used to the previous set of grass blocks? So I think there's a lesson to be learned there, maybe, especially if they plan on adjusting and tweaking the sound design of pain points like the Piston sound effect for the future. The other point to pull out from the snapshot changelog is the witch changes. I've not heard many people talk about the positives of increasing redstone drop amounts for witches, because the Piston thing has sort of eclipsed that, because it's a controversy and people like to talk about that stuff more than they like to talk about the positives, I think. But like, it seems like a good change to me. I think it's interesting that witches are also the main source of redstone and gunpowder in raid farms as well. So this doesn't just affect witch farms that spawn them at witch huts. It also fixes basically anywhere that you would get witches from otherwise, is still going to provide more redstone dust to you, including in scenarios like Skyblock, where redstone comes at a premium until you have villager trading, and you don't have villager trading until you've probably farmed a couple of witches and got like pistons set up so that you can, automate a few aspects of your Skyblock world. So having 8 redstone right off the bat, if you kill a witch in that world, is potentially going to be really helpful. And so I think there's a lot to be said for a subtle increase like that, a subtle rebalance of witch drops, and shifting the meta away from raid farms and into witches wherever you get them are going to be a decent source of redstone. I think that's a really worthwhile change.
I 100% agree. I've got a witch farm in my swamp from several years ago, and it kind of underproduces. Like, I get a lot of sticks and sugar for the amount of redstone that I get. I think this is going to balance that out a little bit more, which is great. I kind of wonder if tweaks like this help with the we'll call it, I guess, the nerf that happened to those cycling raid farms, with the potions, the ominous effects, and all that kind of stuff. In that it lessens the temptation to build the raid farm if you can just build a regular witch farm. And granted, you're not going to get all the same drops, but if one of the main things you're looking for is redstone, then I, as a player, I think I'd be more inclined to do a witch farm at a witch hut than I would be, like, because I feel like that would be easier to set up. This is just, I haven't done either. I've never done a raid farm, but I've also I've not done a witch farm in a very long time. So I'd imagine that the witch farm is still easier from an early game perspective, or for just a labor perspective, versus what you're getting out of it. And we talk a lot about that time in versus reward out, and I think that this is a nice balance.
Yeah, I think it's going to be time in versus reward out if you're getting witch drops exclusively. I think a witch farm is going to be pretty viable, and with the nerf to raid farms, with them having to rely on the bad omen potions now, I think those are going to be a lot less viable, or they're going to be at least balanced with making a farm at a witch hut. I think the main issue with witch farms is that they've changed thanks to Caves and Cliffs terrain generation, and it's not just about like the AFK position, because 64 levels of extra caves is fine if you're AFKing 128 blocks in the sky. It's about height map, right? It's about like there are fewer spawns occurring because it is much higher up, relatively speaking, in the world than it used to be. And so you're getting less frequent spawns, in the same way that if you build an Enderman farm at like Y64 in the end, you're getting very different spawn rates to what you're getting at Y0. But there's not a whole lot we can do about that, so maximizing the redstone output from witches on the back end and allowing them to drop a little bit more is a really solid change for vanilla. And naturally, there's things like that you could adjust with data packs if it was a problem for you before this, but I think for now, I think it's a really great like quality of life thing for players who wanted redstone from that kind of source.
Worth noting too that 4 to 8 is natively. If you've got looting on your sword, then you're going to get more.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. And I think a lot of people are going to be looking for ways to optimize for witch farm construction now and make sure that the like looting is involved in that.
Moving on to chunk mail, which is going to be the rest of the episode because it's the chunk mail dispenser. If you would like to email the show, the address is spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. Please use that email address. It's the easiest way for us to sort everything. Episode 300 is fast approaching, and we are planning an all Q&A episode to celebrate. To try to include as many members of the community as possible, please send in a one-sentence question about anything you would like to speak to us about. It can be Minecraft, podcasting, video games, inspiration, experience. Keep them fun, keep them short, and use 300 Q&A in the subject line to help us file those and get those ready for episode 300.
Our first email from the Chunk Mail Dispenser comes from Craggle09 with the subject of freezing crops. Hey Pix and Joel, I was listening to episode 293, and in it, Joel brought up the idea of being able to stop crop growth, or in other words, freeze it. This reminded me of a Minecraft feedback post I saw around a year ago, which suggested putting ice underneath farmland to freeze crops, therefore stopping growth. I was curious what you guys thought of the idea, and whether there'd be any balancing needed for the feature. Craggle09 clonked every mob in the game with a mace, except for the Warden, which killed him with a sonic boom before he could.
My 80s kid brain reads Sonic Boom like Guile from Street Fighter 2 every time.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Every time. I think using ice to freeze crops is a neat idea. I think it would have to be packed ice, though. I know that ice needs like sky access to melt, but I feel like regular ice, to work with it in the way that you'd want to do this, it would probably melt by accident and get really frustrating at that point. So I think that packed ice, and that also might add like a little bit of extra effort in there for that kind of control, because ice, and I know packed ice exists in the world, but packed ice in Minecraft is used for decoration, it's used for building, it's used for all kinds of different stuff. Farms, moving things around quickly. So I feel like using packed ice, as far as Minecraft is concerned, could be a better use case there. The downside here is that you'd have to wait for the crops to age to a certain level. But I think that was also part of the conversation when we first brought it up, which was using shears to like right click on a crop and stop it at a certain growth stage. But you still have to wait for that growth stage to happen, which means if you're not paying attention and you walk away and it grows past the stage that you want, you're stuck with a full grown plant. You have to harvest it, plant it again, and wait again. So I think one of the, I guess, temptations or the parallels that I see of using shears on glowberries and vines, as well as warped and crimson vines and stuff in the nether, is that it's just so easy to control. You know, you can chop it off at a certain point and then just right click to stop the growth. But those work different than crops. I like the idea. I think it would get in the way of some farms and stuff, because you wouldn't be able to pass a minecart hopper underneath farmland. I feel like at the same time, though, that this would be used for decoration most of the time. You wouldn't necessarily want to use it in redstone farms. So like, it's just little things like that kind of stick in my brain. What I think makes sense about this, though, is actually what they just talked about in the changelog this week for the snapshot, which was the fact that blocks that are less than a full block can often be affected by the block underneath them. So like soul sand affecting your speed if you're walking on a slab that's on soul sand. And I think that this is interesting in that, because a farmland block is not a full block, that ice underneath it would potentially affect the growth of something above it. I think that that's one part of the mechanic here that's suggested that makes sense to me within Minecraft. What do you think about it?
Yeah, if you wanted to go with this freezing mechanic, I still feel like you can change the crop state using bone meal. So I think like a way of artificially growing things could still kind of be worked in there, rather than having to wait around for it to grow naturally. I think it provides some more interesting functionality for ice, which obviously has a lot of applications when it comes to the interaction of item entities and how they move and that kind of thing. But I think this would be an interesting use case for it, in the same way that when you find out the blue ice soul soil basalt generator technique, you kind of go, oh wow, that's like a novel use for that kind of block. And I wonder if you could work in some other kind of state for farmland to have it be like kind of hardened, as though it's kind of been through a harsh winter, and that could look a little different and could maybe be used in like if you want to build a farm in a snowy biome and make it look like everything's kind of frozen over with a dusting of snow or something,
cool.
then aesthetically speaking, it could work in a similar way to hydration, where like, ice within a certain radius could affect it in the same way that water within a certain radius hydrates farmland. Obviously, that affects crop farming in snowy biomes or ice-related biomes at that stage, so it could be a bit of a struggle for players to learn those mechanics to begin with. I think the main thing holding this idea up for me is one of those like game mechanics versus real life arguments, right? Because a lot of the similar mechanics, you look at stuff like waxing copper to prevent it from aging and stuff like that, those all seem to work as real life techniques, or at least they emulate real life techniques with the item set that we have in Minecraft. And I think putting ice under something to freeze it is kind of lateral thinking smart. It's one of those things that doesn't necessarily make sense logically, but you think of ice, you think of freezing, and you think of wanting to freeze something in place. You're not thinking literally freeze it, you're thinking, I want it to stay in this state. Whereas in the real world, I'd expect a plant to wither and die if its roots were constantly exposed to frost. So that there's an element of the real life kind of process there that I think they're trying to sort of emulate in a video gamey way with a lot of Minecraft's farming mechanics and that kind of stuff. Those are things that should emulate the real world way of the natural processes happening. I think the closest we have to real life methods of preventing plants from growing are what's already been implemented into the game, like, effectively by shearing the tip of a cave vine or whatever, you are simulating pruning it and maybe cutting off the living part of the plant that's trying to grow and just leaving whatever remains. And I think stuff like that makes the most sense, but there aren't really many occasions in real life in which people want to stop crops from growing. Like, the idea behind them is that they grow, and then if it's like a shrub or something, you prune it back. But if it's a vegetable, then you harvest it and you wait for something else to grow again. So I think because there are so few examples of people trying to cultivate plants that way in real life, there isn't really a Minecraft equivalent of that feels like it suits the natural approach they're trying to take in the game.
Yeah, it's almost like baby carrots.
Yeah, right.
or pickling cucumbers. Like, you just want to grab them before they turn into the real thing.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's interesting. I never thought about the whole frost idea. It would also be kind of difficult to communicate that to players. Like, how do you tell the player in the game that you can freeze crop growth by putting ice underneath it? Like, that's I don't even know. I mean, I guess because the hoe exists, the player is going to potentially find out how to use it, but I don't know if there's any instructions in the game that tell you how to make farmland. Is there an achievement for farmland? Because I feel like there might be.
There's an achievement for sowing seeds. So like a seedy place, I think, is the one you get for like sowing seeds or crops of any kind. So yeah,
that's
like there is some there is like a whole tab related to like husbandry or whatever, but that's also crop farming as well. And so that's got a lot of the starter information for people. Also, the fact that the hoe exists in the crafting interface and stuff like that. I think multi-block mechanics like this are the hardest thing to sell to the player on an intuitive level. Because even stuff like crafting recipes, there used to be justification for, well, if you put the 3 iron across the top, that looks like the head of a pickaxe, and then the tool's shaft is always 2 sticks. And so people kind of extrapolated crafting recipes from there, and then, look up some stuff on the wiki maybe. But the ability to affect blocks with other blocks, like, I don't know how many people are finding the basalt generator mechanics on their own. And so I wonder if it would be a really hard sell to explain to players, hey, if you put ice blocks in or around or below your crops, then they're gonna freeze up and harden. And I think the majority of players would even go, why would I want to do that? Because they've not thought about using crops decoratively at that stage. They're still just working out how to survive. And so there's a couple of reasons that I'm sure, like, decoratively speaking, builders, and I'm an example of this, I would love to have more control over my environment like that, but in terms of the general game mechanics that are going to apply broadly to Minecraft, it doesn't seem like it has legs.
I mean, just as a side that I know we don't have time to get into, I like the idea of putting an ice or a packed ice block next to something and having frost spread to the next block as like you could put ice at the base of your builds and have frost creep up the walls a little bit by, like a single block or two. And then by controlling where you put that, you could see, some real interesting textures evolve. But like, again, like outside of just putting it in the world and watching it happen, I don't know how you'd communicate that to players.
The next Fire and Ice update might have something to say about it. We'll see.
Yeah. Our next email comes from Input Output. That's the username they sent in about those new music tracks. Hello, frequent listener of the podcast here, just telling what I've picked up from the new tracks and listening to the latest podcast. If you're actually listening closely to all 9 ambient tracks, 3 of them do in fact contain motifs from previous soundtracks, one by each composer. In Endless, the main theme is taken from Infinite Amethyst, both Lana Rain tracks. Komorobi features a main motif from Comforting Memories, both by Kumi Tamioka. And Watcher uses the Midway motif from Echo in the Wind, both, of course, by Aaron Cheroff. This seems to be both intentional and coordinating surprisingly. Maybe this hints at more intertwining of the past soundtracks, and it will occur with new artists beginning to put more tracks into Minecraft over time. I thought this was really cool. The level of depth that's in there in the Minecraft soundtrack for players, like Input Output, to pick up on, I think is very, very cool. It makes sense to me that new composers would continue to write new music for the game and return to existing themes or things that they have written in the past, especially when you're trying to move forward, but you want some level of familiarity with your work. And I'm sure it's probably helpful if you're writing tracks that internally will be played when a player goes through specific biomes, and if those biomes are similar but different, like a birch forest and a flower forest, or a desert and a badlands, or whatever. I feel like pulling some familiar themes but then building upon them would help an area or certain like biomes or like dimensions in Minecraft have a vibe,
Yeah, definitely. Like I am actually curious what conversations go in behind the scenes with Minecraft's sort of sound directors and the people who are in charge of the musical side of things and the composers, because I presume they're briefed on which biomes they're composing for or the general kind of atmosphere that they want. I mean, you think back to Lena Rain's contribution to the Nether update. She knows she's composing for the Nether because everything is kind of spooky and atmospheric and is less like the tracks that she's composed for the Overworld, which have like a lot more kind of open freedom ambience and like a little bit less of that brooding atmosphere to them. But I do wonder how much they've kind of said, we want you to go in this direction with the music, we want you to evoke a certain theme, and how much of it is the composers giving them a bunch of material and then the folks at Minecraft selecting which tracks they think like feel best. And I think I've caught some of Aaron Cheroff's themes recurring in the newer stuff, and I know Lena Rain has occasionally even put C418's melodies into her contributions, or like has quoted them as a kind of like a nod to the original soundtrack, but not made it the focus of the piece. And I think that's an interesting part of the development of the musical soundscape of Minecraft, is that it is still in a constant state of change, much like the world once the player steps in, and I think that's what they're really trying to evoke is, yes, you can do stuff the same way, but why would you when there are so many other ways of doing it, right? I think it's odd composing for a game like this when it doesn't have, like, Minecraft doesn't really have a strong theme, like there's no musical motif the way, like, you can't hum the Minecraft soundtrack in the same way that you could hum, like, the Halo theme or something like that, or, like, the opening music for menu screen for whatever insert video game here. Like, a lot of them are going to have really recognizable melodies, especially if there are sequel games and a whole sort of series. I think most people are going to think of Hagstrom, Minecraft, or Sweden by C418 as the main Minecraft themes, because those are the ones that play throughout the day in survival before 1.18, like before the soundtrack expands with caves and cliffs. And I think that's showed up in like trailers for the game before. It showed up in a lot of like community-made videos. I still use those pieces in my videos sometimes, and I think those are what people think of as Minecraft sound when they're comparing the newer soundtrack editions to the older. And I do think it's interesting that Minecraft, despite being one of the more iconic games in terms of public consciousness and awareness, doesn't have music that people are like, oh yeah, Minecraft, you know, they don't necessarily hum the theme immediately in the same way that you would with like, oh, Indiana Jones, da 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 da, you know, it doesn't kind of hit in exactly the same way musically. And so while they're free to quote themselves in terms of expanding the music and kind of tying it back into each other, there is no strong melodic core that they have to go back to for it to sound like Minecraft music. And I think that's a really interesting like world to be working in as a composer.
I don't know if it's out yet, but I know you often pick up an album, like an LP, a record for the soundtrack. Has the new one come out as a vinyl yet?
So here's the thing. I think the original Minecraft vinyls, Volume Alpha and Volume Beta, only exist because C418 has retained the rights to that music.
I see.
While I don't know this for certain, so again, take this with a grain of salt, and I'm not here to kind of give the scoop on this. I expect that is one of the reasons why C418's contributions to the soundtrack have died out in favor of other composers, is because now Microsoft owns Minecraft. They want to retain the rights to the soundtrack and its distribution, where previously C418 had the rights to his music and was able to distribute it through Bandcamp and on vinyl and, you know, various other things. So they haven't produced a vinyl Minecraft soundtrack. They have produced one for Minecraft Dungeons, and I own that. And I don't know if there's one out for Minecraft Legends, but there might be. So I don't know if they're planning a vinyl in future or if they're just more thinking we're going to release these on Spotify. Digital releases are kind of the way forward.
Yeah.
Maybe even like the waste inherent to the vinyl manufacturing process is a concern for them as a company that's sort of more economically and environmentally conscious. That might be part of it. But I would love a vinyl of the Minecraft soundtrack just because I like to collect video game soundtracks at this point. But I don't know if it necessarily lends itself to that format with 3 separate composers working on it and the music being so focused on a specific update rather than it being a broader soundtrack for the game that's existed for like 10 plus years. Next up, we're going to go to Lieutenant Astro, or LT Astro's email. This is subject line, filling out 4 elements. Hey Joel and Pix, I was recently listening to episode 293 where you mentioned the 4 elemental paintings. This reminded me of a video I saw predicting that Minecraft is filling out the 4 elements through a mob, rod, ball, and weapon. Sorry, I can't find the original video creator. The examples given were blazes and breezes for mobs, which are wind and fire, blaze and breeze rods for rods, wind and fire charges and wind charges for balls, wind and fire, and the mace and trident, wind and water. I'm interested in your opinions on this theory. LT Astro was trying to take a selfie with a breeze when it blew her into lava.
Safety first, I guess, when you're dealing with a breeze. Don't turn your back on them. Working with the elements is a pretty standard fantasy theme, and especially when it comes to non-conventional things like magic or creatures. And I mean, I don't know if there's any real traction to this theory, but I like the idea of Minecraft mobs, as we've seen in recent years, going from, I mean, granted the armadillo, I guess, is the most recent, which is a real world animal, but a lot of times they're bringing in things like the strider, the breeze, and other mobs that are way more fantastical and odd. And I like the idea of a theme of the 4 elements because I think it suits Minecraft really well. I mean, it is exactly what you're dealing with and you're building with from day to day in the game. And Blaze and Breeze are pretty iconic Minecraft mobs, like as far as that head with like floating, spinning pieces around them. And they remind me of elementals from World of Warcraft, but those look very different as well because they tended to touch the ground and have like water tails or fire tails and things. But I'm curious as to what like an earth themed Blaze or something similar would look like. And because we have fire, we have wind, so I guess water would be the other one. And I think the question there is, how do you bring in a water blaze or an earth blaze for the sake of a way to define what they look like and have it be different enough that it's appealing to players and not just look like a reskin?
Yeah.
And have it be something that would offer unique drops as well, because like an earth golem or stone golem, which we've seen in other games, could come into Minecraft, but is that something that attacks the player? Is it throwing stones at the player? Is it throwing stones at other entities? Like, is it like a wolf? Like, is it part of the Minecraft player's team? And then what do you get from a stone golem? Because you already work with a lot of stone and earth from minute one in Minecraft. So
Yeah.
there's a couple of things where the elements involved are already something that the player is saturated with. So it would have to have some sort of unique qualities. But I like the idea of that earth, air, fire, water motif. Maybe it's because I'm an Avatar: The Last Airbender fan. Maybe it's because I'm also an environmentalist, and I know that a lot of times at Mojang they're talking about renewables and trying to have that approach when it comes to things like pandas in the game and dolphins in the game, that kind of thing. And I think that could be really fun, like in terms of if you had a mob, whether friendly or aggressive, to then help educate players about the fragility of the world or impact on the world, like that kind of stuff. I mean, I think that's cool. If it was like a layer on top of like good gameplay, fun, all the kind of things we get from a fun Minecraft mob.
Yeah, I mean, you could introduce a new material, like a new decorative stone type, and have the mobs spawn around that if you're looking at earth golems or whatever. But there were already a couple of people when the breeze was announced sketching up other versions of like the other elements, like the beginning with B as well. I think it was the boar and the brine were the two that people were suggesting, and kind of had like the boar was like a thicker kind of like bulkier, more like a spider in its sort of layout, but then still had the kind of pillars rotating around it and stuff. And like super fast in our chat is saying sounds a bit like the evolutions in Pokemon. Basically like
yes, that's right.
If we apply an element to this, what changes about it, and how do its powers kind of change? In terms of this email and this idea, as a theory, I don't think it really holds a great deal of weight, because like I agree, it's really fun to arrange stuff around the classical four elements. It's very compelling symbolism. That's why the paintings are all symbols. I think the examples that we have of this, though, aren't enough to assume that Minecraft is trying to cover all these elements with these categories. For a start,
I agree.
The three main examples there are the blaze and the breeze, and also the stuff that the blaze and the breeze drop, which for me is not necessarily a sign that there's a trend as much as it is logical game design, that these two similar looking mobs are going to have similar looking items associated with them. Like both drop the rod, and then that can be crafted into the ball with like a few extra ingredients, in the case of blaze powder being part of fire charges. I feel like that doesn't really feel like supporting evidence for them adding earth and water versions of these mobs. It's just consistency in what players can intuit each of these mobs has when encountering them. And the final note here is that the trident and the mace are kind of similar, and the mace is obviously kind of wind element with the wind burst enchantment and it being crafted with a breeze rod. But then the trident is a different story, because yes, they are both fun and unconventional weapons compared to the average, insert material here, sword or axe. But the trident isn't craftable, the mace is. The trident comes from the drowned as a drop, which means it isn't connected to the blaze breeze family, so that kind of nullifies that connection there. The drowned don't drop rods or balls, they drop copper and rotten flesh and stuff. And so there is enough difference, I feel, between the trident and the mace that while they are interesting and unique weapons, they don't really seem like part of a broader trend, other than Minecraft trying to find what's something these things can do that a diamond sword can't. And that seems to be the direction they've taken the mace, even with the more recent nerfs, is the smash attack, the fact that the enchantments can propel you upwards again for combos and that kind of thing, like working in ways that can be fun in a way that a diamond sword is not. So I don't know if I buy the theory. I like the idea of them doing stuff with the classical four elements, and it seems like a solid avenue to go down, but when we spoke to Ulraf about mimics when he was on the show, he was talking about how it's such a frequently visited idea in other media that it sort of seems too predictable and doesn't feel like unique enough to Minecraft when they start to implement stuff like that. I was surprised they added the breeze at all, given that it was such a simple, like, we're taking something with the model of the blaze and then just applying another element to it. And so the fact that that's kind of coming into its own thing and is a unique part of Trial Chambers is great. I don't know if they're just going to go to the next element after this. I think they'll spend at least a little while trying something new.
Yeah, I think that if they decided to go into any element that they're bringing into the game, the first discussion that in my mind I would imagine would happen would be, how do we do this in a Minecrafty way that doesn't just feel like it's pulled from existing, games or culture or expectations? Like, how do we make this go a little bit sideways? Like, for example, the wind charge was not something that I was expecting from the breeze. Like, I expected more of like an area of effect. Like, I expected to kind of hunker down and have it like push you away, some sort of thing like that, as opposed to actually shooting a projectile. I was thinking too that if they added other like elemental projectiles in the game, it might not need anything new altogether. Like, maybe just adding some sort of water projectile to an Elder Guardian just to kind of umph the effort required for that fight, like just to kind of make that a little bit harder because it's been in the game for so long, could be a way to do it. And then with the weapons and stuff, like, again, it's an all right idea, but then you have like earth or stone. Like, we already have those. Like, everything that you make in the game, tools and weapons, are already made out of stuff you dig out of the ground.
The earth is kind of all around us. Yeah, kind of hard to avoid it unless you're playing Skyblock.
So it's already there, right? So yeah, I don't think there's really much of a theory, or the theory there doesn't hold any real weight. But I like the idea, as you said, about moving forward with that kind of stuff. And I think that the one that intrigues me the most is doing more things with water. I think a water elemental type creature in Minecraft, whether it's a new boss, new mob, anything at all that could affect or make Minecraft mechanics really unique. Like, imagine if there was a mob that created water and it was the only way that you could move water into the nether. Like, maybe, like, because that involves like wrangling the thing, like putting it in minecarts, getting it through a portal. Maybe it becomes something else entirely, like even if it was just like a little Easter egg of like, you can have this mob in the overworld, but the moment you bring it to the nether, it turns into a blaze. Like, just little touches like that. Just, it sparks the imagination and just kind of makes me realize that there are so many layers to Minecraft. And if they wanted to, I feel like they have the opportunity to bring something in. I mean, like, neither you or I had Striders on the brain on our bingo card when they brought those out, right? And surprised by those, right? So I feel like that's a really good example of something that is like fire related and deals with hot and cold, but in a very Minecraft way that no one has ever really saw coming, right?
Yeah. Well, I guess LT Astro can say "I told you so" in future when Joel unleashes the Kraken in the Nether.
Our last email comes from Dave V, Inventory and Chest Sorting. Hi there, I am a new listener, and I've been loving the podcast. I am recently returning to Minecraft after 4 years after my last play, and 12 years since my first intro to the game. I still love the game, and I'm slowly discovering all of the new updates since I last played, but I was amazed to see that Mojang still hasn't implemented a sort button in the chest and player inventory UIs. This seems like such a no-brainer for a quality of life update that could easily be implemented. I know there are mods that do this in a way, I know that there is a mod that does this in one way or another, but as a vanilla purist, I try not to mess with mods that usually break with every update. Is this something you have discussed on the pod before? Would love to hear your thoughts about this and simply a quality of life feature. Thanks for the great work. Dave died by swimming in lava while decorating his end portal. I know we've talked about an inventory sorting button before, but what struck me about this was Dave not being around Minecraft. And so he's not a player for a long time that's always wanted one, but a player that took a break and was surprised there wasn't one when he came back. Yeah. I feel like that's probably because Dave was playing other survival and crafting games in his time away from Minecraft, right?
It seems likely, yes.
That feels like that's happening. So you have this knowledge more than I do. Does Stardew Valley or Terraria have sorting buttons? I feel like they do.
And yeah, they do, and they both have other ways of interacting with chests, which are really useful that I think could work reasonably well in Minecraft, where I think just a straight up sort button is not necessarily gonna cut the mustard for a lot of players. How about you? Like, you've played Satisfactory, you played a couple of other games like on stream. Do any of those have sorting buttons that are useful to you?
Satisfactory does, and I do find it very useful. It's alphanumeric. It just puts everything in your inventory in order. However, Satisfactory has a separate toolbar for all of your tools in your like your weapons and your they're not pickaxes, but anything that you use to build or fight is in a separate 5 slot or 6 slot inventory. And then all of your building materials, and that's just what they are in a separate one. So sorting them, alphanumeric is fine. Because you have different build tools in that game, you don't necessarily need to dig into your inventory for finding something to place it down. You simply need to have the storage. And what I find in Satisfactory you're looking for is, I need to look at my inventory quickly and see if I have the thing I need before I travel halfway across the map to build with it. Right. And that's the big thing. No Man's Sky, as far as I remember, doesn't have an inventory sorting button, or it's really not obvious, which could be very possible because the game UI in that is not the best telegraphed situation. But boy, does it need one, because that's an inventory that you can scroll, and it has very large graphics for its inventory items, and then big numbers. Like, you can have stacks of like 10,000 or 99,000 or something like that. Like, it's a lot.
Right.
So you can carry a lot around, and they all kind of look the same, sound the same. It's hard to really kind of keep it organized. And again, like, if that was alphanumeric, then it would help, because a lot of times you're dealing with elements like sodium and then compacted sodium, or like different versions of it, and they would all have very similar names on the elemental table, so they would all end up being next to one another, which would be very cool.
Right. Yeah.
In that sort of sorting. I've certainly felt the need for one, but I've not found one or been told by the game that there is one. We've had this discussion on the show before, and I think that one of the things that I would agree with is that if you had a sorting button in Minecraft, it would have to avoid the hotbar. Like, it would have to just sort the storage part of your inventory and not the 1 through 9 at the bottom that you have sorted.
Definitely. Yeah.
For me, for what it happens to take care of is, I have found lately I've often been running out of inventory space, frustratingly, on stream, and going back to my chest. It's like, okay, what do I not need right now? But then going through the whole inventory and going like, no, I'm using all of these blocks. Like, how can I lessen my inventory space? Only to find out, when I'm really paying attention, that I've got a sub 64 stack of something 3 times in my inventory, taking up 3 inventory spots when it needs 1.
Yeah.
So I'm constantly not taking a full stack of anything. Like, I'm only ever attacking half stacks, because it means that I can pick up more things without spilling over into another inventory space. But a quick sort button, I think, would be good on that. On a simpler side, which wouldn't affect the inventory of a player at all, I think sorting a chest is fine. I don't think there's any harm in putting a sort button on a chest, because, again, very often I just kind of want to go into a chest. If it's a jumble of mess, I kind of want to just order it probably alphabetical and just like have it be easier to discern and figure out what's in it. Very helpful for things like shulker boxes in your ender chest, that kind of stuff. Where do you sit on like the quick button, especially with your experience with things like Stardew Valley and Terraria?
I don't use the button in Stardew Valley that sorts my inventory at all. And I think I don't use it for the same reason that people would find it a problem in Minecraft, is that everyone has a different way of sorting their inventory. Like, I don't necessarily want all of the tools to be all the way on the left-hand side on my quick bar in Stardew Valley. I want them to be like, I have 3 on one layer, and then you can tab or alt to get to like the next layer of your inventory, and it swaps the entire hotbar for the next row. So I'll have like 3 tools there and then 3 tools on the next one, and that's what I use when I'm going mining. So I'll have farming on 1, mining on 2, and then like a couple of extra things, or like food or something will go there. Or food is on the other side of the hotbar, and like coffee and stuff, so you can sprint faster in that game and that kind of thing. And if I hit organize, it all just shifts over to the left. It doesn't leave any space in the middle. And the space in the middle comes from my habits playing Minecraft, where I leave some space in the middle for like blocks that I'm building with, or items that I want to interact with various things, like, the emeralds to remind me I need to go and trade with villagers or anything like that. That all goes in that middle section between the tools and the food. And everyone's going to have a different way of doing that. So I don't touch the sort button. What I do like about Stardew Valley, and it's a similar thing in Terraria, is that it has a means of moving items either into stacks that already exist in chests from your inventory, or vice versa. So you can restock from a chest if you need to go there, just quickly grab all of the seeds that you've already got in your inventory and then continue planting them. You can do that. So if you wanted to walk up to a shulker and it's got all of the blocks you need for your Deep Slate Castle build, and then you just click restock and it moves all of the ones that you've already got like one or two of in your inventory, it just refills those stacks. I would find that really helpful, because then you just place everything down to like just having one or two of it left in your inventory. And I recognize stack management might become a problem at that stage, because you're so rarely going to remember, oh, I should leave one of that and then put that in my inventory. And so there are some ways in which that doesn't necessarily fit with a Minecraft playstyle, but having like a restock button, or what you were suggesting, like a condense button that makes sure that any materials that have smaller stacks are put together to free up inventory space for the rest of the inventory. I think those are ideas that work almost universally. I think organizing 15 years into this game, everybody is going to have different ways of doing it. So unless you're going to conform to the default way Minecraft sorts your inventory, or they are going to implement a way to program it to know how you want your inventory sorted, this is going to mean a much less simple quality of life feature than our correspondent here thinks. I think, like you, it would be beneficial to sort chests rather than player inventory, but I think even then you're going to run into issues. Like, there are some item sorting systems which rely on a chest being full up of a certain item, but just in like ones and twos, so that it only pipes the spruce wood into the chest that's got like one spruce wood log dragged out across every square in there. And if you go in there and if you're in the habit of like automatically hitting organize and it condenses everything into one stack, suddenly that is going to let all the other items through the filter. And so there's a lot of nuance to how players are going to want those systems to work, and none of them are going to be universal, which is why everyone's been saying there are inventory problems in this game for a while. No one solution is going to work for everybody. So it's a really tough decision to make when it comes to this stuff. And I can see why, in coming back to the game after a while, you've run into like, wait, why isn't there a sorting option? It works so well in other games. It's because other games have taught you to sort things that way from the beginning, from their inception, instead of 15 years on trying to implement it. You've seen the hullabaloo people have made this week over piston sounds changing. Imagine if suddenly their arrows and their blocks and their tools weren't where they left them in their inventories. I think it'd be a little difficult to swallow.
Well, I think that's the optional, the opt-in thing that they would have to do. If they did this, it would have to be something that the player would have to click on it. It might even be like a setting in your even accessibility settings, like show sort button or don't show it. So if you don't want to, you can't even click it by accident. Like it's just not there, right? Something you said about Stardew Valley, and something that I remember about Satisfactory, and which also underlines the fact that Satisfactory's inventory is just a giant storage dump, in that Satisfactory has 9 hotbars, and you can sort that however you want.
Yeah.
So that can be your building hotbar with your base building parts. It can be your electrical hotbar with all the power supplies and things that you need. It can also be all your conveyor belts, all of your what's the word they use for it? I guess the piping for dealing with water and liquids in the game. So if you're building a lot with liquids, you flip to hotbar number 5, I guess is maybe mine. And it gives you all the things you need to build with water or liquids. And then vice versa, if you're dealing with a lot of solid material and you're building a factory, it's like, well, here's your sorters, your splitters, your belts, your basic factory components. And I feel like that is what allows you to not really care how your inventory is sorted, but what you care about is something that you've programmed in, which is how you've set up your hotbar. And I'm wondering if that could be something where in Minecraft if they specifically said like you could lock part of your inventory. Like if you like the way that your hotbar is set up and you just say lock it, don't change it, don't mess with it, and save it. And potentially even have it saved in a different way. Maybe somebody wants a PvP hotbar and then they also want a mining, survival gameplay hotbar, that kind of stuff. And I feel like there is multiple hotbars in creative mode, but not something that's available in survival, right?
Yeah, in creative you can have saved inventory states where it's not the full inventory, but it is definitely the hotbar. Yeah.
Hotbar, yeah. So, and I think that could be, that could be really useful for building. I'm like, man, I know that a good portion of my, building experience is like, all right, well, I'm done building the deep slate wall now. I want to build grass around the base of it. And my hotbar is now switched out. Like I have to take all the deep slate and put it up into the inventory and then take all the grass bits and put them down into the hotbar, so I can just use my mouse wheel to scroll back and forth. I know we've got pick block in the game, which works great, but very often I find that the pick block will replace something I don't want it to replace, and then for that one-time use, like that one piece of the deep slate wall that I missed, and now I want to go back to placing all the grass, but then it's removed and the grass, and now there's a deep slate thing in my hotbar, so I have to go back in the inventory. And I do find that the inventory interaction and the constant like opening up and moving things around tedious in Minecraft, and I'm wondering, I don't know if a sorting option is necessarily like the thing that I'm missing. I feel like it's more of I will walk 10 blocks before I open my inventory to pick block something. Like I will, which will take longer. It will take longer, but I feel like, and this could be a creator thing, I feel like it's less of a visual interruption to pop my inventory up like constantly. Like it's more of a visual interruption to do that than it is to walk over to the block and like grab the bush or grab the grass or whatever. And also I just find it easier to see. Like if something that I know I want is in my visual space on the screen, I can walk over to it and grab it. Whereas when I open up the inventory, it's a bunch of little squares that I've got to figure out, okay, this is a checkerboard of where did I put my sticks, or my bushes or whatever. Especially if you're dealing with something like deep slate with variants, or a bunch of different leaf blocks that all look very similar until you hover over them and get the name. I think that's the thing that I think is interesting about the inventory, is that it's hard to look at because of the very uniform grid portion of it. Now, don't get me wrong. I much prefer a grid inventory in any video game to a game that has shaped things, like if your pickaxe was bigger than your blocks, or I find that really tedious.
The Resident Evil like briefcase management mini game where it's like the gun is going to take up this much space, the grenades are taking up smaller, and then the health items are just 1 block each, and that kind of stuff. Yeah, that I find a real problem. And in some cases, like in Satisfactory, they allow you to have smaller icons or larger icons. Like if you want to see very easily visually what you're looking at rather than looking at the name of something, great. Yeah.
Or if you're like, I've just got too much stuff, I don't want to scroll through this inventory, you can reduce the size of the icons to the point where like, okay, you can have a lot of stuff in your inventory before you even start to worry about scrolling through it. And so that's helpful too, right?
It feels like Windows desktop organization, where it's like you've got one folder that loads the icons so you can see the pictures, and then you've got one that lists by date and is sorted differently. That's the problem, is that everybody wants their inventory to be in different states at different times during gameplay. So I feel like one of these days we need to do a show where we maybe ask for community feedback on this, and we basically catalog all the things that people think are the inventory problem, and we lay it all out and kind of have a big discussion about how we would resolve some of it, and like what Minecraft could do in those situations, which I'm sure is something people have done on YouTube or in other places before, but I think it's going to make for a heck of a discussion one of these days, because people are talking about it still all the time. Either way, that's enough talking from us for this episode. That's where we're going to end this episode of The Spawn Chunks. You can find more information about the show and links to some of the stuff that we've talked about today at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud to be a listener-supported podcast. If you're getting some value out of the show, why not consider putting some value back in? You can visit patreon.com/thespawnchunks to join our community. Pledging at any level gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat, and you can listen to the show live when we record it in Discord every week, along with our monthly Minecraft Hangouts, the next of which is coming up on June 1st, where our patrons can let us know what they've been up to in Minecraft that month. We currently have 324 patrons, which is holding steady from last week. There is always room for more. Special thanks go out to our content engineers, Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, Party Voyager, and Yitz. Thank you for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. You can find us at The Spawn Chunks on social media. New episodes are available on Mondays on all of the major podcasting platforms. That includes YouTube. You can email the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The RSS feed is linked on the spawnchunks.com, and the patron-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page. That's where you can listen to the render distance, the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Johnny, but online I go by Pixel Riffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/pixelriffs, where the Minecraft Survival Guide is currently in its 3rd season and will be returning in force once Minecraft SOS concludes. I also stream 3 days a week on Twitch, where I do behind-the-scenes work for the aforementioned YouTube series, and I'm the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, which you can find through a quick YouTube search. Aside from that, I'm at Pixel Riffs on both Twitter and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
Everything that I'm doing online can be found at joelduggan.com. That includes a link to the Citadel Cafe, my podcast about sci-fi and fantasy entertainment. I watched Sugar on Apple TV Plus this past weekend, and I'm looking forward to talking about that. I also stream on Twitch at Joel Duggan, very easy to find. It is Minecraft Thursday through Sunday, with the exception now of Friday, where I'm building the UCS TIE Interceptor from Star Wars Lego.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside is birthday. Happy Infinity, Minecraft.